The human beggar's bold challenge, can he play for his meal? HFY sci-fi story. Rain fell like needles on Cobalt Harbor. Neon bled into puddles. Vents coughed sour smoke. The night smelled of metal and old oil. Jace Arlen kept walking. He kept his head down. He was once a Marine. Now he was a stranger on a rich alien moon. His jacket was torn. His boots were tired. His stomach felt hollow and hot at the same time. Move, soft skin. A passing quarry clicked 3 tongues at him. Jace stepped aside. He did not argue. Pride does not feed you. Pride does not keep you warm. Ahead, a tower glowed like a prism. The sign read, "The Prism Hall." It was famous across the trade lanes. The rich came here to taste rare food and hear rare music. Inside, songs were played on instruments humans did not build and did not understand. 2 stone-faced guards, scaled and tall, watched the door. Jace knew he would not get in. Still, he walked closer. Not to enter. To look, to smell. To remember what food looked like before it was thrown out back. A side door hissed. A figure stepped into the rain. Skin like deep violet glass. Eyes like quicksilver. A Helion. She carried a long case. Everyone knew that case shape. Ether harp. Only masters played it. Jace knew her name from posters. Vara 6. First chair at the Spiral Conservatory. He had never heard her live. Only scraps on public feeds when he could find them. His voice came out rough. "Excuse me." Vara looked at him. She had an artist's steady gaze. She took in the jacket, the boots, the hunger. "Yes? Can I play for a meal?" For a heartbeat, she just blinked. Then she laughed. It was not cruel, but it was sharp. The laugh drew eyes. Aliens on the curb slowed. Someone snorted. Someone whispered, "Human comedy." "You play the ether harp?" Vara asked. "I can play," Jace said. He did not say he had learned on a broken training rig in a ruin on Proxima 9. He did not say he had felt the strings hum like nerves under his hands. He did not say music had saved his mind when the war tried to take it. The guards grinned with open teeth. "Let him try," a passerby called. "It will be good for a laugh." Vara tilted her head. Rain ran down her sharp cheekbones. "Very well, human. If you break it, you starve. If you stun me, you eat." Jace nodded once. He knew a bad bet. He took it anyway. They moved through the door. Warmth hit him. The air inside was sweet with spice and smoke. Light swam along crystal walls. A low murmur of talk. The hall was full. Servers in mirror coats drifted like fish. Eyes found him fast. A wet human with a frayed collar. A violet star walking beside him. Some mouths curled. Some eyes narrowed. Jace kept breathing. On stage, the ether harp waited. It was a sculpture of lines and rings, hung like a web between 2 glass pillars. Its strings were not strings. They were threads of light. They hummed at the edge of hearing like a held breath. Vara set down her case and raised one hand to the room. Her voice carried. A short test. A human asks to play for food. Ripples of laughter moved through the seats. Coins clinked. Wagers started at the back. Jace touched the rail. It was smooth and cold. He could see his face in the metal, gaunt, older than he was. He had seen worse in field mirrors. He sat on the bench. The hall settled. The lights cooled to a gentle blue. He closed his eyes. He remembered the ship corridors, white and hard. He remembered the last order he disobeyed and the last call he got wrong. He remembered a small world seen through a cockpit window and the way it turned away from him. He remembered a mother's song that had no words. His hands hovered over light. "Any time, human," someone called. Laughter followed. Jace breathed in, slow. He let the sound of the room fall away. He reached for the thread inside him that hurt and glowed at the same time. He did not try to be perfect. He did not aim for clever. He aimed for true. His fingers dipped. Nothing happened. A hiss of delight and mockery rippled through the hall. Jace did not move. He listened harder. The harp waited. He let the rain in his memory meet the hum in the strings. He found where they touched. He pressed. A single tone bloomed. It was small. It was clear. It rang like a drop hitting a still lake in a wide cave. The hall went quiet on that first note. The guard straightened. Even Vera's smile thinned into focus. Jace set his second finger. Another tone. A third, a fourth. The notes found each other like lost kin on a crowded dock. They carried dust and wind and the ache of things you cannot fix but carry anyway. He wove a simple line, It was not neat. It was not clean. It was alive. A Helian at a front table touched the corner of one eye. A Saurian stopped chewing. A server forgot a tray and stood still with it held high. Jace kept going. He poured in the cold floor he had slept on last night. He poured in the last bowl he had refused to steal. He poured in the face of a pilot he could not save. He poured in the promise he had once made to be better and the shame of breaking it. He poured in hope anyway. The line rose. It began to climb glass stairs. It reached for air that smelled like spice instead of smoke. It asked a question old as ships and streets. Can we be more than what we were yesterday? Vara was no longer smiling. Her eyes were bright. Her hands had lifted without her knowing, as if to answer a call. The final note did not end. It lingered. It stood in the light and refused to leave. Silence followed, heavy, total. Jace opened his eyes. The room stared back. He swallowed. His voice was small. May I have a meal? And the world inside the prism hall moved all at once. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. The last note still shimmered in the air, hanging between glass and breath. Then, as if the spell had cracked, the hall erupted. Coins hit tables. Hands clapped. Some shouted words Jace didn't understand. A draconian guard blinked twice, their way of showing awe. Vara 6 stood frozen, her long violet fingers trembling near her throat. The disbelief on her face was almost human. Jace stayed seated. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He just looked down at his hands. The hands that had once held a rifle, now glowing faintly from the harp's light. He whispered, "Food." That was the deal. The audience went still again. Then a dozen voices rose at once. "Get him a meal! Give him the best! Encore!" Vara blinked rapidly, regaining composure. She motioned to a server. "Feed him," she said softly, her tone changed, no longer amused but reverent. "Feed him well." A dish appeared within seconds, steaming, fragrant, alive with colors. Jace's throat tightened. He hadn't smelled real food in days. He took one slow bite. The taste hit like memory, warmth, salt, home. The hall watched as the human beggar ate in silence. When he finished, Vara approached. Her blue eyes shimmered like storm glass. "How did you do that?" she asked quietly. Jace shrugged. "I just played." That was not just playing. Vara leaned closer. The ether harp reacts to thoughts, to emotion. Only the most trained minds can align with it. Yet you, she stopped herself, studying him. "You are not trained, are you?" "I learned during the war," he said, voice low. "There was a wrecked temple on Proxima 9. Instruments left behind. No one could make them sing. I could." Vara's gaze flicked toward the instrument, then back to him. "That song, it had pain, but it also had something else. Hope," Jace said simply. "I guess that's all I have left." A murmur spread among the alien patrons. Some looked at him with something new, not disgust, not pity. Curiosity. Vara smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "The hall doesn't allow amateurs, but I think the galaxy should hear you." "I only played for food," Jace reminded her. "Then think of it as earning another meal," Vara replied. Her tone was teasing now, but softer. "Besides, I want to understand how a human could move a room full of species who don't even feel emotions the same way." Jace didn't answer. He wiped his hands on his jacket and stood. His legs shook slightly from exhaustion. He had music, yes, but no home, no future. Just a sound that briefly made the world stop. As he reached the door, Vara's voice stopped him. "Wait, what did you call that song?" He looked over his shoulder. Rain light flickered behind him through the windows. "I didn't name it," he said. "It's just the sound of surviving." And he stepped back into the neon storm. Outside, the rain fell harder, but it felt cleaner. Jace found a dry corner near a vending unit and sat down. For the first time in years, his stomach wasn't empty, and yet something inside him ached even more. He thought of the silence after his last note. The way every species had listened, really listened. It wasn't just music. It was proof. Proof that humans, outnumbered and underestimated, still had something the galaxy didn't: feeling. The next morning, the vids were everywhere. Someone had recorded his performance. It spread like wildfire through the info streams. The human who played the harp of light. The comments were half mockery, half awe. Some said it was fake. Others said it was the most moving sound in a century. By the time Jace woke, drenched and sore, a small crowd had gathered near the alley mouth. They weren't beggars. They were journalists, traders, curious aliens from nearby sectors. A drone camera floated above, glowing red. It zoomed in. "Are you Jace Arlen?" one of them called. "Is it true you made a Helian cry?" another shouted. "Will you play again tonight?" Jace shielded his face. "I'm no performer," he muttered. But the crowd didn't move, and somewhere behind them a familiar voice rose. Musical, commanding, unmistakable. "Then perhaps," Vara 6 said as she stepped into view, "you should become one." The crowd parted for her like a wave. She was dressed differently. No longer in her rain cloak, but in a tailored suit that shimmered with silver threads. Every lens turned toward her. Jace sighed. "I told you I just wanted food." "Yes," Vara said, smiling faintly. "But you gave us something far rarer." "What's that?" She extended a hand. "A reason to listen." For a long moment, Jace just looked at her hand, alien, graceful, glowing faintly blue. Then he took it. And as they walked back toward the Prism Hall under the neon rain, whispers followed them through the streets. Some called him mad. Some called him lucky. But one phrase, carried on static and wind, stuck in his mind. The human who made the stars weep. By the next sunset, Cobalt Harbor was humming with whispers. Every holoscreen in the district replayed a shaky video. The drenched human, the alien stage, the song that silenced the room. The headline read, "Unknown Human Stuns the Prism Hall." Jace Arlen watched it from a broken screen outside a noodle stall. He didn't feel famous. He just felt exposed. Every note he played, every flicker of emotion, now belonged to millions of strangers scattered across half a dozen systems. He picked up his bowl and turned away, but the stall owner, a short insectoid with amber eyes, buzzed nervously. "Your food," it said, sliding the bowl forward. "Paid for." "You are hero of music. I like your song." Jace blinked. "You're giving this for free?" The insectoid nodded. "Free today. Maybe not tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "That's fair." He ate in silence, the warm broth cutting through the cold that had been clinging to him for weeks. But peace never lasted long in Cobalt Harbor. He felt her before he saw her. That strange shimmer in the air when light bends around a Helian's aura. Vara 6 approached through the crowd, her violet glow reflecting off puddles like spilled starlight. She was not dressed for the street this time. Long dark coat, hood pulled low, but even hidden her presence drew eyes. "You didn't come to the hall," she said simply. "I don't belong in the hall," Jace replied, not looking up. "I belong out here." "Funny," Vara said. "Because the hall has been begging me to find you." Jace stopped chewing. "Why?" "Because you made their elite patrons cry and they can't decide if it was genius or humiliation." She smiled, amused. "Either way, they want more." Jace shook his head. "I'm not some act for their curiosity." "I didn't say you were," Vara said softly. "But others are watching now. Some of them are not admirers." Jace frowned. "What do you mean?" "The Council of Artisans," she said. "They control cultural purity laws across the Helian colonies. They think your performance was unnatural." He gave a bitter laugh. "That makes two of us." She leaned closer. "They believe the ether harp should only respond to Helian minds. You proved them wrong in front of the entire sector. That kind of embarrassment doesn't go unpunished." Jace met her eyes. "So I'm a problem now?" "No," Vara said, her voice lowering. "You're a threat." They sat at the edge of the harbor under the hum of passing shuttles. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a glassy reflection of the stars. Jace turned a coin between his fingers, watching the light scatter. "When I was a Marine," he said quietly, "we used to joke that humans never win wars. We just survive them long enough to change the rules." Vara tilted her head. "Then change the rules again. Play for them. Let the galaxy see that what you did wasn't a mistake. It was evolution." Jace snorted. "You think they'll listen to one hungry human with a stolen tune?" "No," she said, and her silver eyes gleamed. "But they'll listen to us." He looked at her sharply. "Us?" Vara smiled. "I've been studying your recording. You did something I've been trying to do for years. You made the harp feel alive. I can play every note in existence, but not like that. I want to learn. And together, Maybe we can show them what harmony really means. He wanted to laugh at the idea, but the way she said harmony like it was sacred made something stir in him. So you want me to teach a Helian how to feel? She gave a small smirk. Only if you're brave enough. Later that night, she brought him to her home. Not the glittering estates most Helians lived in, but a quiet flat above the waterlines. Inside, instruments floated in slow rotation, strings of light, crystal spheres, waves of sound suspended in air. Jace froze at the beauty of it. Beggar crossed to the center and tapped the air. The ether harp unfolded from nothing, its filaments glowing with gentle white fire. Play, she said. He hesitated. And what if I break it? Then I'll know you were honest, he sat. His fingers hovered. The harp recognized him instantly, its strands brightening to gold. Farah's eyes widened. Even her aura flickered in shock. How? It remembers me, Jace whispered. Maybe music does that. He began to play on slow, unsure. Farah joined him, her notes graceful and precise. His were raw and human, full of small mistakes that somehow made the song more alive. The two melodies circled each other, alien and human, clashing at first, then finding rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. When they stopped, neither spoke. The air vibrated with the last echo. Finally, Vera whispered, "That's it. That's what they fear." "What?" "The truth." She looked at him with something between wonder and warning. "That maybe humans were never supposed to follow our music. Maybe we were meant to follow yours." Jace met her gaze. "Then we'll make them hear it." She smiled, slow and dangerous. "Good, because tomorrow you're not playing for food." He frowned. "Then what am I playing for?" Vara's voice was almost a whisper. "For your right to exist." The day after the performance, Jace Arlen found himself in a room full of eyes that didn't blink. A grand hall. The kind reserved for the most significant meetings. The kind that had floors made of polished stone, polished with the memories of centuries-old aristocracy. Every light in the chamber shone brighter than the stars. Vera Six stood beside him, as still as the air, her silver skin glowing faintly in the sharp beams. Her expression had shifted from the warmth of their practice sessions to the cold calculation of someone who was used to being on the other side of the spotlight. Jace felt like a pawn dressed in yesterday's clothes, standing in a room where every gaze could burn him down to his bones. The Helian Council was seated at the far end of the room. Their council chairs, long and tall, looked as though they were carved from the night sky itself. The figures seated in them were shadows, their features masked by the dim light that seemed to bend away from them. Only their eyes were visible, sharp, alien, cold. They had summoned him for one reason, to answer for the music he had dared to play. "We have seen the footage," one of them said. The voice was a harsh whisper, a metallic rasp that vibrated in the air. It came from a tall figure draped in black robes, the edges rippling like liquid. The council leader. "We have heard your performance, human. Your song stirred emotions in the most stoic of minds." It was wrong. Jace didn't speak. There was nothing to say. His gut twisted, his hands clenched behind his back. The silence stretched, and then the council leader spoke again. "You are not supposed to understand our instruments. You do not belong in our art." "I never asked to belong," Jace replied, his voice steady despite the weight of their words. "I only asked to survive. And music, your music, our music, is the only thing left that reminds me I'm human." The council stirred. This time their eyes glowed red for the briefest of moments, a warning, an unspoken threat. "You cannot just play as you please," the second voice hissed from the shadows. The speaker was cloaked in gold, his voice like something dragged across cold stone. "Your performance disturbed the very fabric of our tradition." I played because I had to," Jace interrupted, his chest tightening with frustration. "I had nothing left. No honor, no home, no future. I had nothing but the music in my head and the hunger in my stomach. You want me to apologize for surviving?" The room fell into a tense silence. Vara stepped forward, her posture straight and controlled, like a diplomat on the verge of something both dangerous and necessary. Her eyes flicked toward Jace, then to the council. "The human did not intend to violate your laws. He played from desperation, something that you perhaps have forgotten. The chaos of human existence, the fire that burns in our souls, cannot be ignored, not even by your most refined instruments." The council's gaze shifted to her, Vara had not asked for permission to speak, but it was clear she had the power to bend their attention. Her every word was a challenge. If your people cannot understand raw emotion, she continued, then perhaps you have lost what it means to truly live. She turned to Jace and gave him a nod. We don't ask to be accepted. We just play, and sometimes, that's enough. The council leader looked at them both, eyes narrowing with cold fury. You have already proven your audacity by stepping into a place where only the most privileged belong. And now you come to us with demands? You who have no stake in our world? No understanding of its legacy? Jace swallowed. I have no stake in your world, he admitted, his voice low. But you'd be lying if you said you didn't hear what we made. That song, it wasn't just a performance. It was a bridge. Between us, for a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air, filling the room with tension. Finally, the council leader's voice broke the silence. You are right. It was not just a performance. His voice softened, a rare flicker of something darker in his eyes. It was an infection. Jace's jaw tightened. You think it's an infection because it broke your rules? You think it's a threat to your purity? He looked the leader directly in the eye. But maybe it's exactly what your kind needs. There was a pause. And then in a voice that was as cold as the void between stars, the leader spoke again. Your presence here is an embarrassment, but it is also an opportunity. He turned to his fellow council members. I have no doubt that your music will be played in every corner of the galaxy now. But mark my words, human. If you think your actions have gone unnoticed, you are gravely mistaken. Vera's voice cut through the heavy silence that followed. What are you suggesting? The council leader's gaze turned toward her. We will offer you a deal, human. A chance to continue living, to continue making your music. He stood slowly, as though every movement required a thought, a calculation. But the price will be steep. Jace's heart thudded in his chest. What price? Your song will no longer be yours. It will belong to the Helian Empire. The leader's words were slow, deliberate. You will be required to perform for us. For our people. And you will follow our terms. Should you refuse, we will erase you. Jace stood still. His fists clenched, but he said nothing. Vera spoke next, her voice smooth, but her eyes locked onto the leader. What you ask is impossible. You ask for his soul. You do not understand, the leader said. We are not asking you to play for us. We are asking you to become part of something far larger than yourself. To become our instrument. Just as you have claimed our music as your own. Jace felt the walls of the room close in on him. He could feel the weight of their words. His mind raced and every instinct screamed to refuse. This isn't just about music anymore. This was about survival, about a future that didn't belong to him, but to the very people who had nearly destroyed him. But a small voice inside him said, maybe this is the only way forward. The council leader's eyes lingered on Jace for a moment longer, waiting for the response. I'll think about it, Jace said, his voice steady, but don't expect me to bend the way you want. And with that, the silence returned. The kind of silence that held the weight of 1,000 stars, each one burning and fading in the void. The room felt colder when Jace stepped out. The towering chamber doors closed behind him with a heavy hiss, sealing away the weight of the Helian Council's words. Outside, the air was thick, the distant hum of the city's engines vibrating under his feet. His pulse still raced, heart hammering in his chest as he tried to process what had just happened. The offer had been too simple, too clean, but nothing in Cobalt Harbor was ever simple. Vera stood by the side of the door watching him with that unreadable, silvery gaze. The same eyes that had once glimmered with curiosity now held something else, an edge of quiet worry. You're not taking their deal, she said. Though it wasn't a question, Jace swallowed, turning to face her. You heard them. He shook his head, frustration boiling over. They want me to become a tool, Vara, an instrument. Not just in their music, but in their world. And they want you to bend, she added softly. They'll erase you if you don't, you know that. I can't just give up who I am, who we are for them, Jace said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the decision pressing down on him. I didn't come here to play their game. I came here to find something that was still mine. Vara's eyes softened. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over his arm, grounding him. I'm not asking you to bend, Jace, but I'm not asking you to break either. There's another way. We can still use this. You have the music. You have their attention. He stared at her, incredulous. You think I can just walk out of there and do what? Keep playing for scraps? Keep playing for nothing? Those people control everything. They control the stars. Vera tilted her head, the silver gleam of her skin catching the glow from the distant skyline. You think they control the stars? They think they do, but they don't. The stars are just a backdrop. We control what burns within them. We control what moves across the sky. Jace blinked, the words cutting through the fog of his thoughts. You're talking about rebellion? Not rebellion, Vara said, her tone calm but fierce. Redemption. She paused, looking out over the city, her expression unreadable for a moment. Humans, we're not just meant to be instruments. We're not meant to be controlled. What you played wasn't just sound. It was truth. Raw. Alive. And that truth is more powerful than all of their rules. Jace took a slow breath. But they'll crush me the moment I challenge them. They'll try, she said quietly. But you've already changed the game. You've done the impossible. And they know it. That's why they're afraid. The city buzzed with life, but Jace felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast. Something he couldn't see, but he could feel it rising in his chest. The pressure of the choice. It was bigger than him. Bigger than any of them. Vara was right. The Helian Council was afraid, and he had a feeling he could use that fear. He just wasn't sure how yet. They walked together in silence for a long while, the city lights flickering like tiny embers in the dark. As they reached the edge of the harbor, Jace stopped. The vast skyline stretched before him, a wall of light and steel. He felt insignificant and yet at the same time more alive than he'd felt in years. Tomorrow, Vera said softly, breaking the silence, you'll be forced to play again. They'll want you on their stage, but you won't be playing their tune. Jace turned toward her. What do you mean? You'll play for them, she said, her voice low but steady. But you won't play for their rules. You'll play our song. Your song. The one that echoes across the stars. Jace frowned, confused. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? Vara's smile was sharp, full of secrets. I've made some calls. We're not alone in this. There are others who hear what you did, and they'll stand with us. The next day, Cobalt Harbor was a different place. The streets buzzed with the latest news. The human who played the ether harp had been summoned again, this time by the Helian Council itself. The holoscreens were full of speculations, questions. Jace knew what was coming. He knew they would try to break him, to make him compliant, to make him a part of their system. But as he stood on the platform outside the hall, his fingers itching for the strings, something inside him shifted. A quiet certainty began to grow in his chest. Today he would not play for them. Vera stood beside him. Her voice, as always, calm and certain. Remember what you're fighting for, Jace. This isn't just music. This is freedom. As they stepped into the chamber, the council sat waiting. Their eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in them now. They knew what was at stake. Jace didn't wait for them to speak. He strode to the center of the stage, his gaze steady. This is my song, he said, his voice ringing through the room, and this is the last time you will control it. He raised his hands to the ether harp. The strings hummed alive under his fingertips as the first note trembled into the air. And this time it wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration, a promise, a song for the stars, for humanity, and for the freedom to burn as bright as any galaxy. The tension in the air was palpable as Jace stood before the council. Their eyes, once filled with skepticism and disdain, now held something else, uncertainty. Jace's fingers hovered over the strings of the ether harp, the instrument glowing faintly beneath his touch, waiting for him to call it to life. A moment of silence stretching between the council and him, between centuries of tradition and the raw potential of something new. His chest rose and fell with his breath, slow, steady. He had made his decision. The time for fear was over. He struck the first note. The sound didn't just fill the room, it shattered the air itself. A single note full of anguish, longing, and defiance rang out like a scream into the void. The council shifted, but Jace didn't look at them. He kept his eyes closed, letting the music flow, letting it build. He wasn't just playing anymore. He was speaking through the strings. He was fighting. The hall pulsed with the melody, deep and echoing. For the first time since he had stepped onto that alien world, he wasn't just the outsider, the beggar. He was part of something greater. He could feel the notes rising within him, coming from a place deeper than any training. This wasn't just about skill. This wasn't about them, it was about him. About what he had lived through, what he had lost, and what he was finally willing to fight for. The strings hummed louder, drawing the council's attention, pulling them in. Their masks of indifference cracked as the notes began to weave through the room, the melody breaking the artificial barriers between species. The music wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be perfect. But it was real, raw, alive. And in that moment, Jace understood. The ether harp wasn't just an alien instrument. It wasn't just something to be tamed. It was a language he could speak, a language of feeling, of the soul. And it was louder than any rule or tradition. The council was still, as though they too were held captive by the sound. For a brief second, Jace thought he saw a flicker in their eyes, a recognition of something they had never expected from a human, from someone like him. Then, without warning, the doors at the back of the hall slammed open. The room froze. A squad of heavily armed Helian guards flooded in, their steps silent but deliberate. Their armor gleamed like polished obsidian, but their faces were obscured by dark visors. At their head was a tall figure, his face pale and sharp, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating fury. Enough, the voice was soft, dangerous. Jace's heart skipped in his chest. The figure stepped forward, and Jace's blood ran cold when he recognized him. It was Nevin, Vera's brother, the man who had nearly torn everything apart for her. Jace's fingers faltered on the strings. The music stilled, but the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Nevin's eyes locked on Jace, his expression unreadable. "You should not be here," he said, his voice low and almost tender. "The council does not take kindly to interruptions, human." Jace's hands tensed on the harp's strings. "Then maybe it's time for them to hear something they don't want to." Nevin's lips curled into a thin smile. "Bold words, human. But you must know, we control far more than you realize." He turned to the council, his gaze flickering with something like amusement. "You know, the human has already made a fool of himself. Perhaps it's time to put an end to his insolence." The council murmured amongst themselves, their voices low and hushed. They were clearly divided. The music had rattled their cage. It had gotten under their skin. But Nevin, with his commanding presence, was trying to suppress it. He knew how to break the tension, how to manipulate the moment. But Vara was already moving, her eyes flashing with the same fire Jace had seen when they first met. She stepped forward, facing her brother without hesitation. "You would silence him, Nevin?" Her voice was fierce, daring. "After everything you've already done? No, this song is not yours to control." Nevin turned to her, his jaw tight. "You're already too far gone, Vera," he said, the venom clear in his tone. "You've chosen a human over your own kind. There's no coming back from that. And there's no going back to this," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "This cold, sterile system that breeds nothing but fear. What happened to the Helian people, Nevin? Where did we lose our ability to feel?" Nevin's expression faltered for just a second, a crack in his icy mask. But it was enough. It was enough for Jace to see the doubt, the uncertainty behind his eyes. He turned back to the ether harp. His fingers found the strings again, the familiar hum filling the air. But this time the notes were different. They were not just an expression of his own sorrow. They were a battle cry. He wasn't just playing for survival anymore. This was the beginning of something larger than just him. The music swelled, rising like a tide, unstoppable, relentless. The council, Nevin, the guards, they could try to break him, to silence him, but they could never stop the truth that was woven into every note. They had tried to mold him into something they could control, but they had underestimated the power of a single human who was willing to feel, willing to fight. And for the first time since he had stepped into this world, Jace Arlen knew who he was, a human, alive, undeniable. The doors to the hall slammed open once again, this time with the force of 1,000 crashing waves. And as the light from the outside world spilled into the room, it was more than just light, it was hope. The music surged through the hall, a wave that seemed to roll through every corner of the room, shaking the walls themselves. Jace's hands flew across the ether harp, the notes now woven together with a new kind of urgency, a fire that could not be extinguished. His soul poured into every chord, and the tension that had been building for days finally broke through. The Helian Council remained seated, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly agape. Nevin stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his dark armor reflecting the harsh lights above, his face as cold and calculating as ever. But there was something new in his gaze, something that flickered beneath the surface. Fear. Fear of what? Jace didn't need to know. He didn't care anymore. The music was his truth now. It was his fight, his rebellion. It was the sound of every soldier who had fallen for something they believed in, the sound of every mother who had watched their child grow, the sound of every man and woman who had ever struggled for their place in the stars. He closed his eyes as the final chord of his song echoed out, stretching into the silence. There was nothing else but this sound, nothing but the feeling of his hands on the harp and the certainty that he was no longer the outsider. He wasn't the beggar, the victim, the stranger. He was a force, the one thing the Helian Council could never control. The final note lingered in the air, holding the room in a delicate balance. No one moved. No one breathed. It was Vera who broke the silence. She stepped forward, her silver skin glowing like a beacon in the dimmed room, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable power. "The song is not just his," she said, her eyes turning toward the council. "It belongs to all of us, to the humans who fight, to the Helians who've forgotten the meaning of their own humanity, to the galaxy that stands divided by walls that need to fall." She turned to Jace, her voice softening. "This is our rebellion, our song. It's not just about the past, and it's about the future. And today we'll make them listen." The council remained silent. Their stoic faces were unreadable, their usual arrogance now fractured by the raw energy of Jace's performance. They had built their empire on control, on maintaining a perfect order, and now they were witnessing something they couldn't categorize, couldn't define, couldn't manipulate. This wasn't just music. This was a reckoning. Nevin's gaze never left Jace, his eyes flickering with an emotion that betrayed his attempts at composure. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Enough. The council leader's voice finally sliced through the heavy air. It was cold, commanding, yet tinged with something almost reluctant. "You've made your point, human. You've stirred something in the room." He paused, his lips curling into something almost like a sneer. But the galaxy does not bend to raw emotion. "You can't change that with your music." Jace stood taller now, his eyes meeting the leader's without flinching. "Maybe not," he said slowly, "but I can change what you think of as control. I can show you that we don't need to follow your rules to survive." He took a step forward. "Music isn't just about tradition. It's about change. And it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how pure your blood is. It will come whether you want it or not." For a moment, the leader's eyes flickered with something, a crack. The walls were crumbling. "We were right to fear you," the leader said finally, his voice lower now, the challenge gone from his tone. "You've shown us that our carefully constructed world isn't as secure as we believed." Jace's pulse quickened. "You're right. It's not." He turned to look at Vera, who met his gaze with a small, approving nod. "You can try to contain us, to control us, but you'll never stop the sound." The leader remained silent for a moment longer. Then, with a heavy sigh, he motioned to the guards behind him. The armored figures stepped forward, ready to act, but the leader raised a hand. His eyes met Jace's once more, and this time there was no fury in them, only understanding. "You're free to go," he said quietly, "but don't mistake my words. This isn't an act of mercy. It's a warning." "A warning?" Jace didn't need to hear it. He already knew. The battle wasn't over. The Helian Empire was powerful, and their influence ran deep across the galaxy. But for the first time, Jace felt the shift. They weren't untouchable. They were as vulnerable as anyone else. And if they couldn't control music, then they couldn't control him. Jace turned to Vera, his expression hardening with resolve. "We'll play our song until it drowns out their silence," he said, his voice steady. "And we'll make sure the galaxy hears it." She smiled, her gaze softening. Together. With a final glance at the council, who now watched him with a quiet, hesitant respect, Jace turned and walked toward the exit. The doors slid open and he stepped out into the cool night air. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than before. For the first time since he had arrived on this alien world, he knew what it meant to truly be free. And the song? It was just beginning.